Yeah, at all advanced courses, yeah.
And that's what you did. You signed up for the 25 credit semester.
Yeah.
And you decided that you wanted to go to work during that semester too.
Yeah.
Now, look, if you signed up for it, that means at some level you thought you could handle it.
I've actually, over the last couple of years, I've been saying, can I change my bargain, please?
Well, let's look at Saturn. Now, Saturn has been in your 12th house for a while. It just came out of your 12th house this last year. You know, Saturn came out of your 12th house in, I think it might have been like August. Let me just go back into the ephemeris, and we'll get into it for a second here. Hold on. I wish I had my screen back the way I wanted it to. All right, so this is a problem. All right, so let's go here. Let's go to the ephemeris. Here we go. I do my show on two separate screens, and one of my screens got screwed up. So I have to do this a little differently. It's not as fast and easy as I'd like it to be. Here we go. All right, so now we're looking at, so Saturn this past year it went all the way back to 10 degrees.
Okay.
So it was right in your ascendant for from June. So it hit 10 degrees in May and was right in your ascendant and stayed there, and then it went direct finally in July. But prior to that, in 2010, you've had Saturn. 2010 and 2009, you've had Saturn in your 12th house, and the 12th house Saturn transit is difficult. I was just sharing that with Vaj, the last caller. It's a really difficult transit because the 12th house is, where we, get in contact with, our soul material. And there's a sense of aloneness, there's a sense of challenge, there's a sense of struggle, of being left behind. The Saturn 12th house experience is a lot like what humanity went through when it theoretically got cut off from God in the Garden of Eden.
Oh.
There's a sense of abandonment. There's a sense of, not being, listened to or heard. And then you have to kind of dig down and dig deep and, somehow make that connection once again. Now, theoretically, it would get easier for you when Saturn would be in the first house. But right now, what is Saturn doing? Saturn's on your Neptune. You're having a Saturn-Neptune transit, and Saturn's going to be on your natal Neptune until next year, on and off, on and off. So that's a whole other ball of wax, the Saturn-Neptune transit. Saturn on top of Neptune is the death of illusion. When people go through the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and, either I've got Saturn, and this happens at a certain time in your life. Like I have Neptune and Scorpio. So I'm going to be going through my own Saturn-Neptune conjunction as well. It's the death of illusion. It's the death of kind of these sacred cows that we hold, unto ourselves. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It allows us to be able to kind of live life without rose-colored glasses. And so in some ways, it signals the death of romanticism, but it also lines us up for something greater. It gets us, it's like, okay, well, if this is gone, if my illusion around this has been punctured, then something else has to fill the void. And so the void that's filled with Neptune is a more realistic appreciation of what we call the spiritual experience, because that's what Neptune is. And
Let me ask you. Okay.
Go ahead.
This is a generational thing, though, isn't it? Because Neptune stays in the same place for quite a while. Is that correct?
It is generational. I mean, so Saturn makes sweeps through the generational experience, right?
Yeah.
So right now, your generation, which is Neptune in Libra, is getting that. I have Neptune at an early degree of Scorpio, so my generation is next. Now we're going to get the Saturn, shakedown, the Saturn scrub, and then after that it'll be the Neptune in Sagittarius people, and that's how Saturn works. So yes, indeed, for you, you're looking at, for you guys, you're part of the Uranus and Cancer and the Pluto and Leo. I mean, so for you, you're part of the baby boomers.
Yes.
And for me, how I see that is, and Saturn definitely triggering that, is that, the baby boomers are having to come to grips with the fact that the world didn't turn out the way that they had so gloriously envisioned it.
Yes.
And it's like all the promise. And don't get me wrong, I go back and I look at the speeches of Mario Savio, and I look at a lot of the intentions of people in the Haight-Ashbury movement. A lot of those people were very right-on people and very turned-on people. Peter Coyote wrote a great book about his time during that time, Falling Asleep Where I Lie. It's a great autobiography, highly recommended to people that are part of the boomer generation, because it talks about the struggles of making that grand vision very real. And I think what we're dealing with is the failure of that generation in its leadership. People like Bill Clinton, people like George W. Bush, who were the boomers, and who I believe really let America down in their own ways. And now it's a generation that has to come to grips with that. That's Saturn. That's Saturn on Neptune.
Okay.
And go ahead.
No, I see the loss of illusion and everything I worked for. And it's not that it's a loss of leadership. In my mind, what it is that we bought into an ideal of capitalism, and what was value was working your way through the corporate world. We bought into that.
Yes.
And we realize now that's all the illusion. And frankly, what I look back on, and I look at the ideals of the hippies and so forth, they were right. So it's maybe there isn't a loss of illusion, but I see it a different way for you, or I've experienced it in my heart a different way.
Well, I would say that the hippies were right to some extent, and I would say that the corporatists or the capitalists were right to some extent. At the beginning of the show, I talked briefly about two very odd birthdays. One was G. Gordon Liddy, and the other was Abby Hoffman. Today's Abby Hoffman's birthday. I mean, I think it's interesting that we're talking about this. And I think G. Gordon Liddy and Abby Hoffman are endemic of both the failure of both sides of that equation. You look at somebody like Jerry Rubin. Jerry Rubin moves from one world to the other. Jerry Rubin goes from yippies and the kind of the radical leftist beliefs that Abby Hoffman and the Weather Underground and all those people fostered. And what does he do? He moves right into Wall Street.
Exactly. He sold out entirely.
Totally. And Ronald Reagan, when he was elected president, a lot of people don't understand this, but Reagan hired Stanford Research Institute in order to tap into a voter base. And what they had found out was that there were a group of people that were called basically principles and values. It was a whole subset that SRI, who through a series of punch cards and questionnaires had determined was a real demographic, that these were people that were not necessarily invested in materialism, that they were more invested in the pursuit of the self and understanding the soul, and that they weren't really going out and buying things, and if they did buy things, that they would go to REI and buy things, right? Yeah. So what Reagan did is he hitched his wagon to these people and principles and values, and Jerry Rubin in a weird way kind of fits into that. And what Reagan said is he said, hey, look, we're going to do what you do best, which is innovate, which is live life by your own credo, and we're going to deshackle government from any kind of oversight, and we're going to let this thing kind of run itself. and we're going to allow you to live your own lives and give you your own basic freedoms, and don't worry about the intrusion of government into your lives. That's what Reagan did, and people at that time picked up on that, and they said, "Hey, thumbs up. We're going to roll with that. That sounds good." And so what he did is he capitalized on both aspects of the 60s, because the 60s, if you look at what happened, went from hippiedom to the human potential movement. And the human potential movement morphed into this feel-good capitalism. And that's where you get the Gordon Geckos and the Jerry Rubins, because it became an extension of accessing the self. The self became, it's like, I can be spiritual and I can be rich. And you know what? And to hell with spiritual, let's go with the rich part. And that's where I think both the hippie countercultural movement and the, hey, let's get a job and let's be corporate America movement. Because if you look at corporate America during the 70s and you look at a company like Hewlett-Packard, there were some really good things about corporate America.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, Hewlett-Packard became the model for Apple, became the model for all these .com companies, which I worked for, by the way, which triumphed the spirit of the worker and innovating them and treating them almost like management.
Yeah.
But now what's happened is that a lot of the free money that went towards that is gone. And so we're dealing with something very, very different now. We're dealing with the bare knuckle version of capitalism, which is really the death of an illusion, which I think is what you're referring to.
I'm going to have to listen to the beginning part of it, we can catch the whole thing that you were talking about. But yeah, there definitely is a death, and I do think it is generational.
And let's get back to you with that, because you have Neptune in the first house. And Neptune in the first house is very spiritual, but it also has to deal with illusion. You know, and your Neptune is retrograde, so you're looking backwards. You're looking back. It's a constant kind of revisionist sort of, and your Mercury is retrograde in your chart too. So revisionism is a very powerful aspect in your chart. Now, look, when you have Saturn moving over your Neptune, I think that ultimately there is a point of freedom for you. And it's about freeing yourself from these illusions that a lot of people are being burdened with. And at the same time, you've got Jupiter and Leo, conjunct Pluto in your 11th house, which is a great aspect for manifestation, by the way.
Ah.
Saturn at that time will be sextiling those planets. So, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but I would say that for you to move forward and really be, kind of a success story in the second part of your life, it's about, social networking, the internet, and finding a way to tap into that. Because with Pluto and Jupiter there in the 11th house, you can do quite well. And you've got Mars and Aquarius. Mars and Aquarius is like, driving the internet. So find a way for you to carve out a new career path or a path of purpose where you're really linking up with people, with that 11th house. I think it could be very rewarding for you.
I like that. You didn't realize this, but I really was hoping to hear something more about my career, and that helps a lot.
Well, good. I'm glad. I mean, Jupiter will be an interesting transit for you in 2012. It's in Gemini. You're a Gemini. You've got Mercury in Gemini. Most of your 8th house is Taurus, but it will touch into Gemini in 2012. And then you've got the Jupiter-Sun conjunction. I think it's great. So you could really recast yourself. When we look at, the Jupiter cycle, you're looking at a kind of a rebirth of your identity with Jupiter moving over your Sun.